Hey everyone, welcome back to the stream. Today is the 6th of October 2024, and today's stream will be hopefully nice and quick. We'll see how long it takes. We're going to do part 2 of my reflections on the Binding of Isaac Repentance, and along with that we'll be continuing some of the tier lists that I've been making as part of my reflections. Last stream we went for quite a while, to say the least, going over some of my thoughts on the characters, the bosses, and then my opinions on the rankings of devil and angel items. So today we're gonna continue that by starting with the planetarium tier list, and thankfully the pool of planetarium items is very small anyway, so it shouldn't take too long to figure out a good ranking for them. But after that, for the rest of the stream, I'm just going to be giving my general thoughts on the game. And I will have the game open for that, just to be able to discuss some things in practical scenarios. Because it's a lot easier to discuss things with the game open. But it won't be like anything like super nerdy or anything. It'll just be, I'll start a new run and use that to talk about things. Or just have it in the background kind of thing. That's the plan for today. Hope you guys enjoy. Yeah, we can just get right in. We don't need to do much else as far as introductions are concerned. So yeah, the planetarium item pool in this game, it's the smallest item pool in the game. The thing about the planetarium is that you're actually not able to access the planetarium under ordinary circumstances unless you kind of get lucky. Like, I think it's like a 20% chance at the start, and then it goes down each time you enter a treasure room. But then when you enter a new floor, it goes up to 20% again. Then you enter a treasure room again, it goes down. Something like that. In fact, why not just pull up the wiki page for this? So, setting a floor plus 20, enter a treasure room minus 20. And the base chance is 1%. So seeing a planetarium, let's say on basement 1, when you just spawn into the first floor of the first room of the floor, you have a 1% chance of seeing a planetarium on that floor. And then increases by 20%, and then decreases by 20% when you go into the treasure room. Yeah. And because you have to kind of play intentionally for planetariums for the most part, because you're not going to get a planetarium very easily if you just play your run normally. The devs decided to make planetarium items very strong. And accordingly, we're going to have that be reflected in the name of these tiers. We have the top tier, the excellent tier, and the strong tier. No further tiers are necessary because all the items in the planetarium pool are that good. And there's a good reason for this, right? Because you're skipping on treasure rooms in order to play for like something really powerful, so it better be worth the payoff of doing that. Because otherwise it can set you really far behind if you keep skipping treasure rooms without any real payoff or benefit. So yeah, with that context established, let's just begin. We'll start with Jupiter. And the criteria I'll use for this, obviously for planetarium, you don't need to make choices for the most part, unless you're like re-rolling, I guess. But we're ranking these in terms of you're in a weird position in your run, and you like are playing for planetarium, or a planetarium appeared on the floor. Which item would you most rather see under most circumstances? So that's what we're looking at this from. So starting with Jupiter. Jupiter's an item I think I've not really been disappointed to see, from my recollection. When I was early on into playing this game, like, I unlocked the planetarium achievement, but then didn't really think anything of it. So I wasn't sure how to think of most planetarium items. Like, I entered the planetarium room and then didn't really think of anything about the items that I got from there. It wasn't until later that I was able to really realize that, oh, planetariums are something you actually play for, and the items are really good. And Jupiter was not one of those items I had at the front of my mind at the time, but I think over time I've warmed up to it and really see the value of just getting right away 2 heart containers, even though they're empty. 2 heart containers is really, really good. And on top of that, you get you get a speed down, but if you stand still, you build up speed, and as long as you have the speed built up, or stocked up, basically, the next time you move up to the point where your speed decreases back to your speed that you were at after Jupiter decreased your speed, you basically spit out this gas cloud. And the gas cloud does damage based on your damage stat, but it does a lot of damage. It's kind of poison damage, I guess. But that's to say, Jupiter does a lot by itself. The worst part about this item is the speed down. And in a lot of rooms, the speed down can be a little uncomfortable, especially if your speed stat is not reinforced well enough by the time you would pick up this item. But typically, the best way to use this item is to wait just before entering the next room of enemies, so that you can get your speed built up with this item, and then have it have the gas cloud ready to use against the enemies in that next room. So the speed down can be mitigated for as long as you account for this in this way. But of course, if you're minimum speed, basically the speed you're at after Jupiter decreased your speed, is really low, then it can be uncomfortable to move with high agility, especially in rooms where the enemies are also very agile. But with all this having been said, I still think Jupiter is of top quality. I rarely see the speed down as a severe downside, unless I'm at really low speed as a result. And you're rarely at such a low speed for that to matter. You have to really be at 0.5 speed to feel, or 0.6 speed to feel the detriments. Yes, tier list, let's go. Indeed. What's up, Retro Rage? Yeah, last night was an adventure, but so it shall continue. We've still got a lot to get through. Today I'm actually not ranking as much as I would have wanted to otherwise, just to give my voice a decent rest for work tomorrow. But if we do a part 3, then I'll cover the other tier list I wanted to get to. But I at least still want to be able to cover this tier list and then my general thoughts on the game, because I do think my general thoughts on the game are important enough to cover those before the weekend's over. What's up, Storm Claymore? Another 11-hour stream? Definitely not. Not tonight. Tonight's going to be more maximum 3 hours, probably. I would be surprised if it gets there, but you can hold me to it if it somehow gets longer. I doubt it will, though. Yeah, but Jupiter is only really bad if your speed is really low. It's got to be 0.6 or lower, pretty much, for the low speed to be a major difference maker. And even then, it's still giving you 2 heart containers, even though they're empty heart containers. It's still giving you 3 heart containers and a high damage source available to you through the gas cloud. So I would say it's a very high quality item under most circumstances for me personally. I've had only one run where Jupiter was notably weird to work with because my speed was really low in that run, but that was also because I was trying to go for boss rush in that run. And even then, Jupiter's gas cloud's damage was still helping out quite a bit despite my extremely low speed, and I was playing as a keeper character, so that's a story of its own. But yeah, Jupiter's excellent. Or top, I should say. Another top item is Venus. Venus, I haven't seen this item as much as other planetarium items. I feel this is one of the planetarium items I see least often. Just on my, just off the top of my head. I don't think I've had this as much. I'm not sure if it's weighted lower. I doubt it. But I just find it interesting. I very often see a lot of other planetarium items than Venus. But Venus is super good nonetheless. They're all weighted the same, which is not surprising. But yeah, Venus is super good. It's insane. It gives you a heart container, it heals a red heart, and it basically gives you an invisible aura, where if enemies are in the aura, they get charmed. just like they just get charmed straight up while they're in the aura. And it's not like a duration. It's like they're charmed while they're inside of the aura. And you can think of it like this. You walk into a room and it's like I'm not sure if this will go over any of your heads. I'm sure one of you will get it, but it's like if Aizen walked outside and there are a bunch of people playing soccer outside, like Aizen walks outside and everyone like feels like, you know, their body trembling and they have to like get on their knees because the effect of Aizen's spiritual pressure is so high, right? That's a Bleach reference there, if any of you caught it. But that's like what Venus is. You like walk into a new room, you don't have any clue. You don't have any clue what enemies are, or what enemies are going to be in that room, but the enemies just like fight each other and they just die. Like Venus is like legit hard carry for clearing rooms. It's kind of funny. Like just seeing Venus just do all the work for you for clearing rooms is just hilarious. You do have to be careful about dodging still, because you can still take contact damage and stuff. But in general, when enemies are charmed, they won't try to attack you. Like with the tier, for example. They'll target each other pretty much. They'll target every other enemy that's not charmed. But even when everything is charmed, they'll still like attack each other. It's pretty funny. This item is super good. Like, I don't really need to say that much about it. It's easy to use and it's just insane. And we've got just nothing but bangers here in the beginning of this planetarium list. Next up is Luna. Luna, when you read it on paper, like, it's like, it does what? It's like those YouTube thumbnails, like, it does what? Yeah. Let's take a look at the wiki and see all the things it does. So upon acquiring it, it won't do this, but for the next floors after you've acquired it, it'll add an additional secret room and super secret room. So you get 2 extra secret rooms, and it'll reveal one of the secret rooms on the map at the start of each floor, as well as upon picking it up for the current floor. And then on top of that, for each of the secret rooms that you have with this item, there'll be like a beam of light in the center of the secret room. And if you walk into that beam of light, you'll get a half soul heart, and then you'll get a tier rate up for the rest of the floor. Is it rest of the floor? I think it's rest of the floor. Yeah. It's a fire rate up for the rest of the floor. It's really dumb. And it stacks. It stacks with other beams of light that you go to on the same floor. So if you open up all the secret rooms, like basically 4 secret rooms in total, right? If you open up all of them, you'll get potentially the wiki here says 2.5 fire rate up for that floor. And cumulatively, you'll get 2 soul hearts in total. It's just like, why? Why did it do all of this? The tricky part about this item is that you still have to find the secret rooms, and the layouts it gives can be, well, a lot of the time the layouts it gives for finding secret rooms are not too hard to find them, but sometimes it can interfere with other items you might have that add additional special rooms. Sometimes it interferes with Voodoo Head. Not very commonly though, to be honest. But basically, if you have anything that's also adding any special rooms in addition to what this item is doing in terms of adding new secret rooms, it might be a bit harder to find the secret rooms, or it might like interfere with the ability of that item to give more special rooms to you. But to be honest, these are not generally downsides you're gonna really feel or notice, especially given all the upside that just comes with this item. Free soul hearts, yeah, you know, it just sets up your health like really easily for pretty much the rest of the run. And the fact that you get fire rate up helps a lot for the boss, because it gives you a chance to get your your combat appropriately prepared for the boss if you're reliant on your tiers for your build. And even if you're not, like, it makes your tiers so much better. 2.5 fire rate is no joke for the rest of the floor, that is. So it's not something that can be used just for the boss, but of course, anytime you engage with enemies in rooms, you'll be able to have that extra tier rate to deal with them. It's just a crazy item. I don't really need to talk too much about the fact that you're getting literally extra secret rooms, which also just means more value and more resources possible through this item. It's really good. there are situations where if you need something to help you right there, right then at the moment, then you might still prefer to see something like Venus or Jupiter. But Luna sets you up in terms of the long term of the run, and that's not something that Venus and Jupiter do in that same way, but honestly, they're still just as good in terms of facilitating a run win. And yeah, in terms of like which is the best of these three we've ranked so far, I've long thought Luna is like the best, to be honest, just because like the extra secret room value is something that you can't really challenge with any other item in the game, on top of the fact that you're getting health and fire rate. But honestly, like if I get Venus a few more times, I'm sure I'll think that it's better, because Venus is just kind of dumb. And Jupiter's strong in its own right, of course. But yeah, that's Luna. Next is Mars. So Mars basically gives you an iframes dash that you can execute by double tapping a movement button on your D-pad or analog stick, and you'll basically just get an iframes dash in that direction. The iframes dash works the same as the dash that's done with a pony, the boss drop from Headless Horseman, and from what other items do it? There's like a bunch of items that are like this. Suplex as well. Suplex has the same dash. There's actually some synergies apparently. Having a pony and white pony lowers the dash cooldown to 1.5 seconds. I never even knew that. That's interesting. But yeah, it's just an iframes dash. That's it. It's invincible. It does damage. The damage, to be exact, is 4 times your damage stat plus 8. And it's pretty good damage. Against bosses, it doesn't feel like the damage is high, but it's still just helping you out in terms of killing the boss. One of the main issues with Mars, to be honest, is that after you use Mars, there's no like protection against damage for the recovery. So if you position yourself such that the dash ends within the enemy's contact damage box, then you'll just get hit right after the Mars dash ends. And that tends to be a little annoying, but you know, the best way to mitigate for that is just position yourself for the dash slightly closer to the enemy so that it doesn't like end right inside of the enemy's collision box. Another issue that a lot of people run into, and this is noted on the wiki here, with a controller, tapping the joystick is rather inconsistent and the dash can often activate by accident. Using the directional path instead is recommended. Yeah, something that I noticed about my own movement myself is that I make very like, I guess, rigid and abrupt movements with the analog stick as my normal movement. So that movement, when it translates over to Mars, causes me to like dash all over the place on accident, right? But that's something that can be like learned and trained to not have happen. And I don't think that necessarily makes the item any worse than it is. However, not even with taking that into account, but just the general application of this item for other characters. Some characters like the 2 Lost and the 2 Keepers might not necessarily want to take this item because they're much more susceptible to dying due to accidents. And, you know, obviously they have only 1 or 2 hits they can take before they die. So Mars might not be a good idea for them because you're not going to see the payoff be as high for the level of risk that you're posing to yourself. Now, apart from what I mentioned about just Mars being an iframes dash, of course that means free curse rooms. That means you can kill shopkeepers for free. But you can also use it to check pills without being hit by a bad trip. And that is a big concept that applies for like a lot of such kinds of iframes mechanisms. And Mars is no exception in that regard. It's really nice for that because you never have to worry about checking a pill and not playing around bad trip when you have like only 1 soul heart at that time. So all of this to say, I think Mars would be rated excellent in my opinion. It does offer the utility side. It does have something to offer as well for combat, but I do think the top 3 items are just simply hard to like really parallel, even for something as good as Mars. And you know, there's a lot less maintenance, so to speak, for Jupiter, Venus, and Luna that I think Mars kind of requires a bit more to overcome. But it's not to say that like Mars is not able to match the level of power that Jupiter, Venus, and Luna output. It's more so that I think Jupiter, Venus, and Luna are just insane on paper, and you know, Mars, in like to the extent that you're able to make use of the dash in combat, like every time it's not on cooldown, that's probably the maximum like power level it can provide. But iframes in this game are really powerful too, so I do think this would be like the highest item in excellent, but it's just barely out of top in my opinion, because I don't think we're going to add anything else to top on this list. Alright, next is Mercurius. Mercurius gives a movement speed up, I think it's 0.3 or 4. We can check quickly. 0.4. That's a lot of movement speed from one item. But yeah, it gives 0.4 movement speed, and it also allows you to or it also allows for all doors to stay open when you enter them, including doors that are in rooms with enemies in them. The thing is, for boss doors, the door usually stays closed for Mercurius. It's so sad. But because you're able to just fly through rooms, and in this game, one of the most difficult things about entering new rooms is not knowing what's in that room. If you don't know what's in the room, it's much harder to compose yourself and fight the room properly in a way that like puts yourself at the least amount of risk, clears the enemies without taking much damage, if at all, and you know, allows for you to like play into like maybe finding a secret room from a death rattle, or essentially like letting yourself get the most resources you can. There's a lot of like small things that you can take into account for how to clear a room like properly, and it's much easier to do that when you know what's in the room. And Mercurius basically just allows you to scout the room, and then the door's still open, so you can just leave behind and then come back in the room later, or just re-enter it right away. And you have the knowledge of what's in the room, so you're able to decide how you want to clear it. And even if you get midway through the room and you still feel uncomfortable after clearing a few enemies, you can still leave and then come back later. If you feel like you need to get an item maybe from a treasure room that you passed by, or maybe there is a trinket that you dropped and you want to use that trinket just for that room. All of these things can be done with Mercurius. There are also ways you can farm with Mercurius. These are a bit niche, but I just want to mention a couple of them because they're nice to just give examples to show how Mercurius is also a great utility item. But if you have an item like Serpent's Kiss, which allows you to have a chance to drop black hearts from enemies when you kill them with contact damage, you can use Mercurius to farm black hearts if you have Serpent's Kiss and it's an enemy that doesn't deal contact damage. And that's a very legitimate strategy. A lot of the time, if you have such a combination available, you got to make full use of it to keep yourself in stable condition throughout the run. That's one such example. There are also ways of farming for active item charges with jumper cables, and that's much easier to do because all you need is literally jumper cables, and then you need a bunch of enemies in the room, and you have effectively a bunch of active item charges. The main issue with combinations that rely on champion drops, because champions also do drop potential pickups, is that I believe champions only drop their pickup once when they're killed, so you can't really use Mercurius to abuse farming pickups from champions. And I believe the same goes for room clears as well, because of course when you clear the room, and the room clear reward drops, you can't get the room clear reward again. But basically all this to say is Mercurius is really good, and even if you don't use it in any of those utility manners that I just mentioned, you can just use it for going fast. This is one of the best speedrun items for getting the speed marks like Boss Rush and Hush. And yeah, the wiki mentioned some of the things I talked about. Leech also works for getting any amount of healing you would like, but Mercurius is a very legitimate utility item. I think a lot of people underrate the side of it that allows you to perform those things, because, you know, it's great for going fast, it's great for skipping rooms, but in actuality, you can make use of it to build an economy with your items. I think it is excellent tier. Again, the power level of top tier is really, really hard to challenge, but Mercurius is very strong, and this is one of the planetarium items I end up seeing very often for whatever reason. Strange how it works. But yeah, that's Mercurius. Next is Neptunus. Neptunus basically passively builds up like a charge bar, and when while the charge bar is filled, any portion of it, the more it's filled, it gives you a massive fire rate when you press the fire button. But if you hold down the fire button, the charge bar gradually goes down, which decreases your fire rate over time. And basically, once the charge bar is empty, then you're back to your normal fire rate. So you can think of it like as a massive fire rate up. The thing is, Neptunus can actually be abused to keep and maintain a high fire rate from it by simply just mashing the fire button rather than holding it down. The charge bar decreases much more slowly when you just mash the Neptunus, or when you just mash the fire button with the Neptunus. So yeah, I mean, it's very simple. It's not actually a complicated item by any means. I think a lot of people rank this item in high regard. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really good. And I probably will put it in top, but I don't know if it's like that insane. Like, I'm not super like mesmerized by it or anything, but I'm also going to admit that like a lot of the time when I get this item, like, I'm not necessarily looking forward to having to mash for it, but that is the best way to be able to make use of what it gives. I do think it is perhaps the power level of here or here, but I still haven't fully like decided how I feel about it, because again, there's definitely bias in terms of my not liking the idea of needing to mash for it. Although I turn around and say that I like Spirit Sword, so that's a whole different story, isn't it? But at the same time, I mean, it is effectively a DPS up for a lot of situations that you're in. I can't really think of a situation where it isn't a DPS up. You can even just have base tiers and it'll put in a lot of work. And that's the thing too. If you're like in super early game and there's a planetarium in like basement 1 or 2, Neptunus is one of the best things you can probably find from that planetarium. I mean, everything in top is a good thing to find, let's be real. But, you know, I think Neptunus is definitely one of them as well, because it allows you to have a bit more comfort with clearing rooms. Next is Pluto. Pluto is a big size down and a tier rate up. I think Pluto internally basically sizes you down the maximum. It sizes you down by 3 or something. There's like normal size, and there's size down 1, size down 2, size down 3, something like that, I think. And I think Pluto would be size down 3. We can take a quick look if the wiki says. Doesn't look like it says, but it's not super important. Like, I can just retract what I said and say I'm not sure. But regardless, the tier rate up helps a lot if you really need it. But I think the most important part about Pluto is definitely the size down. Size down in this game reduces your hurt box, but size up does not actually increase your hurt box. At least size up from the base size. So you know, when you spawn into the run, your base size is like determines your base hurt box, right? But if you size up from the base size, you're not increasing your hurt box any further. But if you size up from a smaller size, then you're increasing your hurt box slightly, right? But Pluto is basically reducing you to the lowest size, so your hurt box is going to be the lowest it can be. The nice thing about Pluto is that it's actually really good as a defensive item. And for characters where defense doesn't come for free, such as with Tainted Lost for the Lost and for Tainted Jacob as well, this item is really good for them. I mean, it's also just good for any character that can just die out of nowhere. And I already illustrated some of the characters that can. But honestly, every character in the game can have a moment where they get blindsided by a room or a boss, and this offers like a solid means of avoiding damage. But the thing about Pluto as well, with its size down, a lot of tiers actually end up passing over you. I'm not sure how it's calculated, but this game has some internal like tier height stat or something that's applied for it's applied for determining whether something will hit you if it's at your same height or not. But I don't really know how it works. I'm not even going to get into it any deeper than that. Let's go. What's up, Zenryoku? Yep. We got one more tier list here for today. There's probably going to be one more or a couple more for part 3, but no guarantees yet. I just want to get through today's stream and then we'll figure it out from there. But after this, we're going to be given the general reflection, which I'm sure you'll be interested in hearing. But hope all is well. Happy Sunday night. Yeah, so yeah, Pluto's size down matters a lot because, you know, tiers can go over you. And in general, because you're so small, your hurt box is reduced. It allows you to evade with much greater ease and think that you're sick at the game, when in reality, like, things just can't hit you. You're all good? Awesome, glad to hear. Yeah, I am as well, thanks. I was tired today, but I'm feeling better now. Yeah, I don't know if the tier rate is as important for evaluating how good this item is. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna put Pluto here. It feels kind of weird to do this though, but I do think the size down is really good. Like, some time ago I was kind of mad whenever I'd see Pluto, but after my time playing characters like Tainted Jacob and Tainted Lost, I mean, obviously this is one of their best items, right? I don't want to bias that too much, right? But Pluto is not even just defense for those characters. In some regards, like, not talking about Tainted Lost here since you can fly it to begin with, but for like Keeper, for example, your size down actually allows you to like sometimes pass through certain obstacles that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Now, it's not always the most consistent, and you have to be careful about soft locking in those situations, but it is something notable, and we can consider that a utility kind of component of this item. And then there's also the idea of being able to sometimes enter curse rooms for free because of some jank with the curse room doors hurt box or something, I don't know, or hitbox rather. But basically sometimes you can go into the curse room for free without taking damage. It's kind of weird. The other notable thing about Pluto with its size down is that when you go inside crawl spaces and you have a certain amount of speed, you'll fall through the crawl space boundaries and you'll enter error room. That can be done either on accident or intentionally, because error rooms definitely have a lot of value, but error rooms also force you to go to the next floor unless you have a teleport or a way to get out of there otherwise. But again, this can be done with intentionality if you have the teleport card, or if you are done with the floor and the next floor you would go down to from the error room would be the floor you wanted to go to anyway. You definitely have to be careful about this though, because if you're going for Mother, going to error room in this way and not having a backup plan can definitely mean the end of your run. But it's something that can be done using Pluto, because Pluto provides the size down requisite for error room through call space on its own. And, you know, but if error room is not what you want to do, I don't recommend going inside crawl spaces at all, because again, you can just go to error room on an accident. It's really easy to happen when you have Pluto, even if your speed isn't super high. I think the lowest speed I've had going into error room with Pluto was like, I want to say like 1.35, but I'm sure you don't even need that high of a speed to be able to do it. I think you can get there without having that high of a speed. Anyway, That's Pluto. Next is Saturnus. Saturnus gives you like a ring of tears around you, and they orbit you when you enter new rooms. Doesn't matter if those rooms have enemies or not, they orbit you. And they orbit you for a certain amount of time before they dissipate. Or before either they dissipate or they hit an enemy. Saturnus also allows for enemy tear shots to be joined into your orbit. Basically, if they travel along the orbit's path, then they'll start to like follow the other tiers that are orbiting around you. I guess it's kind of cool defensively. I don't know. I don't think Saturnus is on the level of other planetarium items, but I will admit, like, this does allow for some rooms to be a lot more of a breath of fresh air, especially if it's like a room where there's like a lot of enemies shooting tears at you from like all sorts of different angles. Like early on into basement, there's a room with pooters that shoot like tears at you from 4 different directions, and having Saturnus for that kind of room definitely makes it a lot less scary. There are all sorts of those kinds of rooms. There's also rooms with the what's that obstacle called? I want to get this obstacle name right. We're gonna look at it right now. All the enemies in this whole game. Surely they would have found them. Oh, Grimace. That's what they're called. Yeah, Grimace. So there are a couple of rooms with the Grimaces, and sometimes when you have to backtrack through them because there weren't enemies in those rooms, you have to backtrack through them, and the Grimaces are still shooting at you despite like you're walking through that room like sometime earlier, right? Saturnus can help because it'll like allow for the tears that the Grimaces fire to be like joints in your orbit, so that can make it a lot easier too, because you know it's always tilting to take damage from the Grimaces when you're backtracking, because like I'm just trying to optimize the floor, you know, and the Grimaces still fire at you, and you just take basically like what's it called, unforced damage, so to speak. It's super annoying, but Saturnus can help with that. But I still think it's like definitely strong tier. It's not, I don't think it's excellent necessarily, but Planetarium is just wicked sick all over the place. So that's not to say Saturnus is a bad item. We're just talking in relative terms here. Next is Soul. Soul is a really cool item that does a lot. We can go ahead and pull it up. This is another one of the items that's good for speed marks. Boss Rush into Hush, that is. So what it does, it shows the location of the boss on the minimap. If you have the minimap, that is. If you're not Curse of the Lost. But yeah, it does that. And also, after killing the boss in the boss room, it allows for the following effect to trigger. It activates the effect of the sun, and for those of you that are unaware, the sun effect is a full heal. Full heal does damage. I don't think the damage is applied, but it does damage. Let's just leave that in there. It also reveals the whole map, and it reveals the secret room location. But it won't reveal super secret room. On top of the sun effect, it'll also give 3 damage and 1 luck for the rest of the floor. It'll fully recharge your currently held active item, and it'll remove all curses on the floor except Curse of the Labyrinth, which is XL. So an XL floor is already an XL floor, so it can't remove an XL curse, but it can remove any other curse you have, including Curse of the Lost. This is a really good planetarium item. Again, great for going fast because it just shows you the boss straight up, allowing you to beeline straight there, and it fully recharges your active item, which can be really useful. Sometimes you have a utility active or like something that you're trying to farm from your active item, and you're not able to use it as often as you'd otherwise be able to because you skip so many rooms, right? Theoretically, if you're trying to go fast, right? But Soul allows you to still be able to use that active item again, despite not having cleared a bunch of rooms or having orphaned a lot of rooms, right? You probably miss out on a lot of value or opportunity on that floor, but this item allows you to retain it and still probably get even more than what you would have gotten had you cleared every other room but didn't have Soul. And the 3 damage and +1 luck is nothing to scoff at either. If you're not going for like a fast mark, this is really useful for going back to the rooms that you did orphan, because it allows you to clear those rooms much easier. And the +1 luck also has a non-trivial effect on room clear rewards. Not necessarily that you're going to get chests, like per se, but again, luck does change what kind of room clear rewards you'll get. Not to mention the fact that it affects tier-based effects, right? That are based on luck. One thing I'll point out is that for the Void, which is the Delirium floor, the soul only triggers in one of the boss rooms, and it's kind of random which one it does. I don't know what way there is to tell which one it'll trigger for it. Yeah, otherwise, that's the soul. We can go ahead and put it in... this is a hard one. I didn't really think about the placement with all I was saying about it. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in... Ah, that's hard. I'm gonna put it in excellent, probably. The thing is, removing curses is really good, because if you get a curse the blind floor, you just say no. You cross your arms and say no. Like, get outplayed, game. No curse the blind for me on this floor. It's so nice to just like say no, negate the curse of the blind, and be able to go back to like the shop or the treasure room that you left behind and check what item's actually in there without feeling afraid of picking up an item that isn't compatible with your build. I think excellent is appropriate for it. It's pretty good. Okay, next is Terra. Terra turns your tiers into rock tiers, and the rock tiers destroy obstacles such as rocks, secret room entrances. Is that it? I think that's it, pretty much. I mean, in terms of obstacles, at least. It looks like they also have extra knockback. And yeah, it gives you a +1 damage as well. The thing about Terra is that you can use it for speedrunning as well, because it also breaks open doors. If you're not in like a chest or dark room, Terra, like if you're not in chest or dark room, you can bomb open doors while you're still in a room in order to leave the room while there are enemies in there still. But of course, if you go back to that room, the enemies will all respawn. If you killed any at least, and you didn't clear the room. But Terra allows you to like quote unquote bomb open doors without actually need to spend a bomb for it. So Terra is like free bombs pretty much in this regard, at least. It can't kill shopkeepers, but it can still break open doors, and it can break open secret room entrances, and it can destroy rocks, which makes it a really good speedrun item as well. I don't know if it's better than Mercurius for speedrunning. I don't think it's like that clear cut. I think they both do different things, but Terra is probably what most people would prefer because of the additional damage up with it. But then, you know, you do lose speed if you're talking about the comparison directly with Mercurius. That being said, I don't know if Terra is as good as like the stuff in top. It's tricky, but I think it's excellent. The stuff in top does a little bit more. Like Terra, I think the most I would say it does is save you bombs, which saving bombs matters a lot. Don't get me wrong. Saving bombs is awesome to do, but it's saving you bombs and it gives you damage. That's like the most we can really think of as what it's doing. And if you're a character with flight, Terra is not necessarily a good item all the time for that character, because you might destroy your cover that you'd prefer to use while you're shooting at enemies. Mostly applicable if you're a character with flight and spectral, but even if you just have flight, Terra can be a little weird to play with because you might destroy your own obstacle that you're hiding on top of, which exposes you to enemies that are trying to shoot at you from behind that rock. Okay, finally, last planetarium item in the game, we've got Uranus. Uranus gives you ice tears. That's it. Just ice tears. Ice tears in this game, basically what happens is, and this applies for all of your tiers when you have Uranus, but what happens is that if you shoot at an enemy, you got a chance to slow them while you're shooting at them, and then if you kill them, they get frozen. And when an enemy is frozen as it dies, because when an enemy is frozen, they only get frozen if they die, right? But if they die frozen, then they will not activate their death rattle if they have one. And death rattles just mean the enemy does something when they die. So like they either explode or they shoot out like an array of tears, or what other death rattles are there even in this game? Or I guess they like fire like a projectile upwards or something, because there are a couple of enemies that like shoot up like an ipecac projectile. But anyway, frozen enemies cannot use their death rattle, and they stay frozen. Like if the frozen enemy stays there in the room as a collidable object that you can push, if you walk into, you can push it and it like causes the frozen enemy to slide in that direction you pushed in. And if they contact something else, whether it's an obstacle or another enemy, they will like the frozen enemy will like break up into like small icicle pieces that can hit other enemies and freeze them as well. So it allows you like form like chain reactions when you kill enemies afterwards. I think Uranus is a cool item visually. I'm a big fan of ice. I think that's quite easy to see through. But at the same time, is this item as good as other planetarium items? I don't necessarily think so. I think a lot of people kind of overlook this, but having every enemy be frozen by your tears isn't necessarily always a good thing. There are often a lot of times where if you're trying to basically, if you're playing for maximum value early game especially, where you don't have many access to resources or bombs, typically a good thing to do to optimize rooms is to use explosive enemies' death rattles to blow open secret room entrances, or to blow open an inaccessible pickup that you want to get to because it's blocked by like an obstacle or a rock or a vase, right? And that's available to do when the enemies have their death rattle available. But if the death rattle is sealed off from you for the rest of the run, that no longer becomes available, right? Now, the other side of the argument is that it's Uranus. You don't need death rattles because this item does so much for room clearing. That's the other side of the argument, right? The issue with that logic is that Uranus is not actually like doing anything other than like freezing enemies. You still have to be able to deal the damage to kill the enemy for the freeze to like matter, right? And even then, you still have to be able to push that frozen enemy into the other enemies that are still uncleared. So if you have a big struggle with clearing enemies, typically the first enemy is what I'm talking about in a room, then Uranus is not going to be the best at helping you clear those first enemies. Because yeah, if you want to talk about things that are good for clearing rooms, we can have a conversation about Neptunus, which is literally a damage up, or a DPS up, sorry. Or Venus, which you just walk into rooms and things die. Or Jupiter, which you can just sit behind a gas cloud and watch enemies just slowly get poisoned over time. Like, those items are legit at helping you clear rooms because they do the work for you. Uranus, you still have to be able to kill the first enemies in the room without too much stress or issues. And of course, once you do that, you can use that frozen enemy to push them into like other enemies and create the chain reaction in that regard, right? But against some final bosses, that's not even really a factor. That's not something that really helps you. And this is not giving you anything else but the ice tier. It's not giving you health. It's not giving you stats up. It's not giving you any utility. In fact, this is like the opposite of utility. This is just helping you with clearing rooms, and that's it. So overall, while I do think ice tears are great, and again, they do help once you're able to clear that first enemy, and there are plenty of ordinary bosses where this is a very relevant item to have, I don't think it's quite on the level as the items that are in excellent or top. But I am a big Ice Tears fan. I don't mind seeing Uranus, but at the same time, there are definitely better planetarium items in the game than this. Ones that are also more versatile. Yeah, guys, so this is my planetarium ranking for this game. Nice, short, and sweet. I don't necessarily think that this is like the word of law or anything. I've already mentioned during this tier list that there are a couple of these items that I just don't get as often as the other one. So I might have a change of opinion like over a long period of time. But for the time being, I'm content with how these are ranked. And again, this is not ordered in rank by any means. Everything here, as you see, is just in the tier or not in the tier. There's no ranking within the tiers. Okay, well, we're done with that. Let me take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll start with talking about my general thoughts on the entirety of The Binding of Isaac Repentance. And this might take the rest of the stream, I should imagine. We'll probably go for an hour and a half or two. See you guys after 5 minutes. Hey guys, I'm back. Thanks for waiting. So now we're gonna shift gears to my general thoughts on the entirety of the whole game of Binding of Isaac Repentance. We're gonna start from discussing gameplay things, mostly progression from start to finish, and how I felt about how the game takes you through its journey over time. And then we'll discuss more aesthetic related things. You know, the art, the creative side of the game that's not necessarily directly gameplay related, but stuff that I still want to share thoughts on. So that's the plan. Give me a quick moment to set up the actual game, because I do want to have the game open while I'm talking, but otherwise you'll still see the resuming soon slide for a brief additional moments. You know what, we'll also get some Isaac music in there to fit the theme. Okay. I think we're all set. I think. There we go. Should be visible now. Alright, so the Binding of Isaac Repentance. It starts with this cutscene that plays. This cutscene plays the same way regardless of your progress in the game. But I'm not going to talk about this cutscene. We can talk about aesthetic things after we talk about the gameplay, because the gameplay is what we all talk about this game for, isn't it? So what is this game, The Binding of Isaac Repentance, right? It's an indie roguelite. I'm not going to talk about the roguelite versus roguelike. I don't want to detract from the conversation that pertains to this game specifically. But indie roguelite game with the top-down perspective, and it focuses on progressing through successive dungeon floors, and every single engagement with the game is procedurally generated. The way the game generates successive floors does have like a method to it, and once you really get into the nitty-gritty of the game, there's ways to like manipulate how certain things are generated in order to make completing the run a lot easier. Like, it's somewhat of an art form, getting to that point in the game where you can let the game be your own sandbox. I think a lot of people do refer to this game as kind of a sandbox game in some ways, and I can see it. I think Isaac definitely has that much openness in the gameplay design that allows for the player to really explore and experiment to their heart's content in a way that a lot of other games don't really allow you to do, because of either hard-code restrictions or you know, the desire to leave out unintended functionality, things of the like, right? A lot of other games They want you to play by the rules of the game and nothing beyond that. But I do think this game has a whole lot to offer if you really try to deeply explore it, and it's something that, again, is kind of unmatched in a lot of the games I've played before, at least. So yeah, anyway, before I ramble on and on, let's get some focus to this discussion. So, gameplay to start. We're just going to boot up a run right now. We're going to boot up a run. Let's boot up an Isaac run, because Isaac is the vanilla character after all. When you boot up a run, you're plunged into the basement, affectionately known as Basement 1. You're told the controls of the game, you're told how to move, attack, bomb, and item. And that's all you're told. So we can already see right away, one of the central tenets of this game is the game's lack of direction to the player. Like, the game does not tell you how to play it, other than literally what you see on the floor right here. This is all it tells you the whole time. Everything else, it's like, it's up to you to figure out. And that is something that carries throughout the whole time that you play the game. Like, everything in the game is built around this idea that, all right, we've made our players be completely dumb and unknowing of how the game works, and we're designing things in this game accordingly. And the way I'm going to refer to this from now on is knowledge checks. This game has quite a few of them. What is a knowledge check? Why am I calling it some specific way? The way I like to think of a knowledge check is it's not something that's like, oh, this is good to know. It's something that where if you don't know about it, you're not going to succeed as much in the game as if you had known about it. So for example, like, if the game didn't tell you how to move, attack, bomb, and item, right? If it didn't tell you a single thing, if it didn't even tell you the base controls, then obviously that would be like a knowledge check. Do you know how to shoot, right? You have to find the shoot button. But thankfully, the game's knowledge checks are not so primitive as that. The game does not see the player as such a lowly human creature where they will not tell you the very basic controls, right? Right? Surely not. I will say, this, like, game, this, like, what you see right here, where the game tells you the base controls, I do not remember that from the little time that I played Rebirth. It must have been added at some point between Rebirth and Repentance, but I'm not sure which version of the game it was added in. But even something as simple as these movement controls were not communicated through the means that you see right now. They might have been told in the options, who knows? But even then, I have no clue whether they were even told in Rebirth whatsoever. So this must have been added at some point. But regardless, I want to just convey the point that you can already basically tell from the get-go that this game does not tell you how it works, and you're just plopped into the middle of, you know, an environment, a set of surroundings where you have to figure out and fend for yourself. And again, everything in this game is built around that. So in terms of my thoughts, how I feel about a game that centralizes its design, like, around not telling the player how the game works, I personally don't know. I didn't know how I felt about it for a long time. I feel like, oh, this game having so many, like, esoteric knowledge things is a little too much, and I don't really like it because I just end up opening the wiki over and over while I'm playing, right? And of course, the wiki's an external resource built from people in the community that have played this game for a long time, right? So naturally, all of it is community sourced, and all of it may or may not be faulty. But I'm not a huge fan of when games don't tell you anything at all about how it works. So already this was a little bit off-putting for me when I first started. But over time, I think I drew a liking to it, mostly because I started to realize how much there is to explore in this game. And by the game not telling you how anything works, it can kind of give you some sort of satisfaction in figuring things out for yourself or watching how other people figure things out. And again, for me personally, a lot of the things I learned about the game were from watching other people rather than necessarily figuring out on my own. But like, once you're put in the practical environment where you just like engage with enemies, the other thing you have to realize is that this game is not really complex. It's very simple. The difficulty doesn't come from like necessarily archaic or like over exaggerated features of the game, but it doesn't even come from like mechanical skill necessarily. It all comes from the depth of the knowledge that you can explore for yourself once you play it further. Like, there's so many things that you can learn about the game that are just not immediately evident on the surface, right? And that's where like the complexity comes from. Because again, it's very simple. The controls tell you right there how simple the game is. And if you just do this the whole time, you might not really see the extra layer there is to the whole game. But I do think that the devs in making the game in this way definitely appealed to me in a way I didn't really expect it to. But again, had I not watched a lot of other people play the game beforehand, I might have been a little too overwhelmed and just dropped it right away, because again, it's like, do I really want to figure all this out for myself, or do I just want to have a chill time playing a relatively simple game to control and, you know, playing a game with a very unique aesthetic, right? Would I rather just do that, or would I rather have the wiki open and, like, you know, study what the items do, what combinations create what, and all of that, right? But again, I think this appealed to me in a very strange way that I didn't really appreciate until I probably got deeper into it. So right from the get-go, I want to mention that, yeah, I do think over time I drew a liking to this game's way of presenting the game to a new player, which is basically not telling you anything. This game does not tell you anything. But yeah, so one thing I should mention along with the point of the game not telling you anything is the scaling of difficulty in this game. As I mentioned before, this game is very simple, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say it's easy. But it's also a roguelite, and roguelites by their very nature are very random. You can see like a lot of rooms are not going to be the same. I mean, there are cases where you'll see the same room multiple times, but that doesn't mean it's not random. This game tries to keep up the randomness by having several different kinds of runs that you can encounter, several different kinds of enemies, combinations of enemies. But at the end of the day, there's going to be set rooms that you'll see, which you'll see multiple times if you play the game enough. There's going to be set bosses. There's only so many number of bosses in the game. There's only so many number of characters in the game, for that matter. There's only so many number of ways to randomize the experience of playing the game. So why are we saying that this game is simple then? We already talked about the controls being simple, but we talk now about the randomness being rich and complex. So why is this a simple game still? The thing is, the random nature of this game does not necessarily demand high experience and skill from the player, apart from what they would naturally gain by repeated playthroughs. And when you start out the game for the first time, the game is very gentle. It's not going to throw out its hardest things at you until further playthroughs, which I think kind of leaks into one of my future points about meta progression. But to like keep things simple for now, let's make it succinct with this one point I have listed here, and it's that this game is hard to be good at, but you don't need to be good in order to complete the game. I think that's a very important takeaway from what I gathered playing this game start to finish, is that a lot of people can get all the achievements, a lot of people can get all the marks without necessarily needing to like understand the game at a deep level, right? But something that is not mutually understood is that if you reach like a good level of play at this game, you're still rewarded. It's not like it's not rewarded. And I think that actually is because of the simple nature of the game that's possible to even happen. Because otherwise, all the randomness would just be too difficult to surmount in terms of becoming better at the game. And again, that's something I appreciate. I think simple games that are allowing for a player to like express a deeper level of skill at the game, but can still be appreciated and played in the full by people that don't necessarily want to go there, just means it's going to reach a broader audience, like right then and there, right? And there's a reason why this game is really popular, because it's really easy for anyone to appreciate this game, regardless of how much they play it. Now, in terms of specific things that can be appreciated by any player, this game has so many items, right? So many items and so many different kinds of effects that those items provide. There's not a lot of like redundancy. Like when you pay really close attention, a lot of items aren't actually redundant. One would think that a roguelike game that is inspired heavily by Zelda will just have a lot of item effects that are just improved stats. Check. Right? But this game has several items that do way more than improve stats. And we have an example of this one already. It's not even hard to find an example because of how plentiful and high of a range of items of this kind are in the game. But the item I just picked up, rockets in a jar, you can use bombs by placing them, as the first stream said, right? But this rockets in a jar like adds an upgrade to your bomb. It's not just improving your stats, but it gives a notable change in effect to your bomb, which is you can fire rockets if you wanted to, instead of just placing the bomb. But the game doesn't tell you this, unfortunately. And as I was saying earlier, the game doesn't really tell you anything. Like when you pick up an item, there's sometimes a small little description when you pick it up to hopefully hint at whatever the item does. And you just have to hope that it's something that's actually useful in terms of an item description, because oftentimes it is not useful, the item description. We can see though that our starting item didn't have a description either, so we don't even know what it does, theoretically. But that's, I guess, up to the player to figure out, and I don't know how people figure things out at the very start, but one thing that you just have to keep developing over time is the knowledge gained from trying new things out. And I wish that the game had a better way of communicating, hey, this is the new way you can get knowledge, as opposed to what seems to have been the way to do so, which was rules cards. From what I've read on the wiki, rules cards are supposed to be hints at certain secrets in the game, but I don't think rules cards were very well handled themselves, because they end up just being very cryptic hints at who knows what, right? And you have to kind of play a guessing game at what the rules card is even referring to. And I think that kind of defeats the purpose of it in the first place. So I'm not super impressed with the way the deeper knowledge is handled, but at least for the entry level, like when you first start playing, the game keeps you interested to explore things enough where you're like, okay, I can play this game. I can decide whether I want to like really get deep into it or whether I just want to have a chill and relaxing time, but I know I can enjoy it either way. So that's that point. And this is that was a positive point, by the way. That's not like a negative point. I might have sounded like it was all over the place, but that was a positive point. Are we feeling the external music? Maybe I should just put in-game music. That's probably gonna work better. It'll just be the same music the whole time because I'm gonna be on one floor for the most part. Give it a pause. Let me see. I'm realizing I might as well just use in-game music. We're gonna talk about the music pretty soon anyway, because the music in this game is a big part of the experience. But yeah, okay. So next is the meta progression, right? When you first start the game, you have only a few set of characters you can pick from, and the characters don't have access to everything that they'll be able to use as you get more unlocks. And that's to say, this game is built off of an unlock system in general. I think the whole idea behind it is to make sure that the player isn't overwhelmed and can gradually find new things that keep them interested in playing the game. It's something that a lot of new games don't do as much anymore, because unlocks are seen as like bloat or something by a lot of players. They're like, oh, there's so much content, but I don't have access to it despite paying for it, I have to like play more to get it, right? But this can be seen as a clever way to keep the player invested and give them new things and like have them be rewarded for continuing to play the game. It becomes something that a lot of people get annoyed with though when you pay full price for the game. But at the same time, I think for a game like Isaac, it works out well enough, the meta progression, because inherently the game, it just doesn't really tell you anything about how the game works, right? But seeing unlocks helps give the player feedback, like, hey, I'm doing something right, at least. I'm doing something that the game might have accounted for. And at the same time, it also keeps the secrets interesting, right? Because there are plenty of secrets in this game that, again, most players will never be able to figure it out on their own. But then if there's an achievement for it, then the players that figure it out can tell their friends that there's an achievement for it. And then that allows for everyone else to be able to figure out a consistent way to get the secrets that are related to achievement unlocks. So I do think that aspect of meta progression is cool. The way the game starts out, you start with only a subset of the bosses being possible to fight, a subset of potential room layouts, and a subset of the characters in the game. And over time, as you do more things, more bosses are added to the game, more types of floors are added to the game, and eventually there's an unlock called Everything Just Got Harder, something like that, or like Everything Just Got Harder too. I think there's like 2 of those, and those both increase the difficulty of the game by adding harder room layouts, by adding more bosses, by adding longer floors on average. And those kinds of things kind of keep the player on their toes if they keep playing. I think this way of making the game more difficult over time, it's a really cool way to, like, I guess, integrate a player into the game system that you have. Because eventually, like, the goal is to get them acclimated to, like, the real game, right? And we're just theorizing that the real game is the point in time where you have the Everything Just Got Harder too. Because we have to assume that's what the dev wants everyone to be able to play, because they consider that to be like the real difficulty of the game, right? And I think that's also the same way the game handles the hard difficulty. Hard difficulty is, I believe, already unlocked when you start, but the game doesn't really push you in the direction of that until you start realizing that the marks for normal difficulty are all gray, and the marks for hard difficulty are all like this red outline with blood that you see right here. Part of the aesthetic of the game, right? But that like subtle distinction, I think, is supposed to eventually let players know that, hey, in order to progress the game further in the meta progression, you actually need to play the harder mode that we want you to eventually be able to play. But by starting you out with the easier modes, you'll be able to build up the knowledge that we keep concealed on purpose, right? That by design, the game is not telling the player much about anything, because eventually they want the player to be able to feel the natural reward of being able to play the game that the dev actually intended for them to play. And that's how progression is handled just over time. So after you unlock Everything Gets Harder too, you get all of the rebirth unlocks, right? And a lot of unlocks from that point on are associated with character completion marks, which is what you see on this pause menu post-it note right here. And all of these completion marks are usually associated with some sort of item unlock. And these item unlocks are not necessarily like anything else than just like a reward for continuing to play the game, and see that like there's more stuff that the dev adds to the game than what's on the surface when you initially start playing. And a lot of these items get really, really cool. You don't even need to do like the stuff for harder characters, so to speak, to see how cool some of these items are. And even for the items that are in the base game, they made sure to have plenty of items that were interesting enough to make sure that, like, you know, it's not like, hey, we locked behind all the cool items behind unlocks so that, you know, only the true hardcore dedicated players can be able to use them. No, they didn't do that. There are plenty of like distinct and great items that are in the game to begin with, and it makes sure that, again, everyone can appreciate the game for what it is without having to necessarily commit to the full 637 marathon for the game, right? And when I talk about 637, I'm obviously talking about Repentance. The Repentance has loads of content, and again, after you do the Everything Just Got Harder 2 and you unlock all of the additional floors that are associated with the basic floors that you start out with, there's then a couple of secret boss fights that, again, are really well concealed and hidden, that unfortunately I think that's where the game starts to lose a little bit of the charm that it has and the luster that it has, where a lot of the coolest secrets in the game are hidden behind very confusing or convoluted unlock conditions. So as an example, by the time you get to the point where you can fight Hush because you've unlocked Blue Womb, you realize that you need to actually get to Womb 2 in 30 minutes. And by then you probably fought Mom's Heart and It Lives the requisite number of times. You need to get to Blue Womb in 30 minutes, or Womb 2 in 30 minutes, and then the Hush door opens, right? You're able to fight Hush, but after you fight Hush, that's an ending. But then when you fight Hush the second time, you're able to go to a new area that's hidden behind a room, and it's a little portal that takes you to the void. And there's a new boss, right? And it's like, oh cool, new boss, new area, new floors. The issue with the new boss area, new floors, that's where I think the quality started to dip down a bit. And again, it started to lose its charm in terms of like the joy of like unlocking new things in this game, because the experience of fighting some of these like new floors and new enemies and the new boss Delirium isn't quite as like engaging, interesting, or polished. I think the Delirium fight in particular is kind of a slap in the face to a lot of players, because it's like, man, what did I do wrong? What did I get hit by? Now, naturally, every time you newly fight a boss, it's going to be a knowledge check, right? You might not know what the boss does, you're unsure, whatever, fine. You just go back there again. But in the case of Delirium, again, the conditions being 30 minutes to get to Womb 2, then you have to beat Hush in order to get to Delirium, makes it such that you're not really sure what you might do wrong, and you're not sure if you can even reproduce the situation to get to that boss to be able to fix your wrongs. So I think that's where some of the issues with the game start to kind of rear their ugly head for Isaac in particular. And that relates a lot to boss design, but not just boss design in this case, but just like the fact that a lot of these secrets are a bit too mysterious and arcane for a lot of players. And it doesn't feel like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it has the same charm when you keep seeing like these same like weird secrets that require all these weird things you need to do in order to get them. And if you think Hush is a weird secret to get to, it gets even worse from there in terms of like the conditions to do certain things. It gets worse when you have to figure out the way to get to an all new boss path that's that was released in what's it called, in Repentance, through the beast fight. It's the Ascent. And in order to do the Ascent, you have to figure out that you need to place the Polaroid on a secret door in Depths 2 that suddenly appears after you beat the Mother Boss once. And you can only beat the Mother Boss once after you figure out that a secret exit is one of the achievement unlocks. And the fact that the alt path allows you to, like, the alt path, by the way, just so you guys know what I'm talking about, is this blue door right here. This is the way you are able to assemble the conditions to be able to go fight Mother, beat her once, and then find the secret exit, get to the door that's in Depths 2, place the Polaroid or negative on there to be able to fight the beast. And again, I think that's just where things just get a little too out of hand with the way this game tries to hide the things that are in the game. It's a way different thing when you're playing the game like just kind of lay back, chill, and normal, and things are just unlocked through like very normal gameplay, right? But when things in the game that you unlock over like a long period of time are then gated behind some really just weird and impossible to figure out on your own sort of set of steps, to fight this really like cool boss or boss experience, but then the steps to do so are just absolutely ridiculous and out the mind. I think that's where things are a lot more questionable. And we can take a trip down into the alt path. Specifically, this is called Downpour, so I can talk about Downpour a little bit, because I do think the alt path stuff and overall Repentance stuff is really, really good, but I'm not a big fan of what they did with the conditions to be able to fight the new bosses that they added in Repentance. So the meta progression starts out good. To summarize, the meta progression starts out good, and then I think slowly tapers off as the player ventures deeper into the game and starts to unlock more things. And no, it's not just because, oh, I see much fewer achievements as I keep playing. It's not because of that. It's because the sorts of things that are related to progressing in the game become a lot less clear to the player. And the game is not clear it's not very clear to begin with when you start the game. But it's clear enough where you at least feel like you can kind of just, you know, dip your toes into the water kind of thing without worrying in too much fear that you'll drown. But the player realizes soon after unlocking enough things that are in Repentance especially that, oh, that is not true whatsoever. There are plenty of things that you don't know and you're not going to be able to figure out on your own. So that's just something I have a big issue with. And I think it gets worse when you realize just how much there is to unlock in the game. And a lot of these 637 achievements are gated behind these very mysterious steps that you have to do to play the content that's in Repentance. So over time, I just felt like, man, this is a little too much. And it's not a good thing when the player feels like there's too much in the game, in my opinion. Because a player saying too much, like I'm full, that's too much, they shouldn't be saying that if the food was good, right? Like, it's like you ate good food and you're saying, oh, this is too much. Like, if you got the balance of portions and like the joy of the experience right, then no one should be needing to say that the food was too much. And in the case of Isaac, right, if people are enjoying playing it for however long they want to play it, you gotta just leave it at that. You gotta know when to stop putting things in the game to keep the player entertained. If the player wants to keep being entertained, they're gonna find a way to do it if they like the game a lot, right? But that's not to say this game shouldn't have added the content that it did in Repentance. That's more so to say the way it added the new content was through even more convoluted secrets that I think just got worse and worse over time. And again, it just alienates the players that are trying to play without looking at wikis all the time. And in my opinion, that's not really like a good look, even for an indie game. And it is worth pointing out again, yes, this is an indie game. It's really impressive what it does considering it is an indie game. But that being said, I am not sure if the content that was added in Repentance was compatible with what was already in Isaac beforehand. And maybe Repentance should have just been its own like extension of Isaac, like just its own game entirely. But that's kind of a deviant point, isn't it? Alright, so yeah, meta progression, I think I've established well my points on that topic. The other thing I want to point out is that I'm a big fan of the Repentance content. I think it's far and above the best content that Isaac has to offer. The alt path, I always go on now, and I don't go on Downpour 1, let me just be clear. I'm on Downpour 1 right now, but I did that just for illustrative effect. I like the alt path much more for pretty much everything. The music, the enemies, the bosses, the floors, the amount of things you can do and interact in the Isaac environment. Like, it's way better on alt path, I think, than in the main path. The main path definitely feels like a step down in terms of the quality of playing it, and it's kind of easy to tell and easy to understand why, because the content added in Repentance, including the alt path, was over a much more matured period of time, with players that were fans of the game and loved the game, and kind of knew what fit well with a game like this. Whereas the content beforehand was like kind of content that was kind of losing its age and charm over time, and the players that were still playing were just mega fans. And from what I heard, the previous expansion after Rift Plus left a really bad taste in players' mouths. So it's not surprising to hear that. It's not surprising to hear that in light of my own opinions on the quality of playing the regular path that is going from basement to caves to depths, as opposed to playing the alt path, which is going downpour, mines, mausoleum. And even though we're sticking with gameplay related points right now, it just feels like a much more immersive experience playing on the alt path. So I do want to point out, while this content feels like the best, and it feels good to unlock it because it's like even more of a reward when you're playing something that you really like and you're playing something that you like worked for, right? But at the same time, it kind of exposes the problem with all that it takes to even get to this point. Like, you're making the player do all of this, and it's not even like all of this necessarily, it's the things that you need to do specifically. It's just like, why would it have to be so confusing for someone that is getting to this game for the first time? It just feels like it's purposely trying to be impossible to figure out on your own, which is just punishing for people that are trying to get into it newly. So that's meta progression. I think honestly there's not much else to talk about meta progression. Again, I will say though, the items in this game are really, really creative. And we can talk about items right now, because I do think items are a highlight of the game and just the experience of getting better at it overall. But the way Isaac works is, as you gradually descend, you'll be able to improve your character, whether it's through stats, whether it's through whether it's through items that apply an effect for a brief amount of time and then have a cooldown, etc. There's also all sorts of consumables. There's trinkets that provide you a passive effect, but then can be swapped out for other things if you need to just look for something in the moment. And there's plenty of utility things you can do too. And the way everything interacts with items and like your resources available to your character, that is the coins, bombs, and keys, I think is the most rewarding part of playing the game. Like, just the experience of improving your character. It's not, again, it's not just a straightforward like, oh, pick up item, stat number goes up. Like, there's a lot more to items in the game, and it feels like genuinely well thought out. Like, a lot of the stuff that you can do has a strategical component and a mechanical component. And I always love when there's like a dual prong like aspect to the gameplay, because it means that like different kinds of players that favor mechanics or strategy can like showcase their skills in different ways. And even if it's not about showcasing skills, it's about being able to play the game in the way you want to play it. And that's always more fun for me, when I can play the game without feeling like I'm being restricted, as opposed to a game that's like heavily restrictive. The items range from like, you know, magic spells to like familiars that assist you with fighting, defensive items that can prevent you from taking damage. But the core of the game is around the tier-based combat, which is like basically just shooting a gun pretty much from your eyes. The thing is, a lot of other forms of combat are possible in this game. It's not just through tiers. Again, there's the Zelda inspiration, so there's going to be like melee weapons, there's going to be shields. You can even, with some items, like just straight up walk into enemies, and some characters even allow you to do that too. In fact, we can quickly see a character like that right now. Characters that walk into enemies. Isn't that interesting? But that, I think, is really cool about the game, is the fact that you can actually just play it in so many different ways beyond just the core mechanic of shooting tears at the enemies. Something that I still don't think is conveyed well to the player, though, is the fact that certain items aren't necessarily like an item that will passively give you something, because there are some passive items that are added to your inventory and are actually activated through like a command. So maybe that's like one criticism I'll give to the way items work in the game. It's not really clear whether it's an item that like just gives you like a passive effect versus an item that's added to your inventory as a passive but actually can be activated, such as like divine intervention, or what's another good one? Mars is also one. Items like that. But yeah, the fact that like there's, and I guess that just kind of leads in the point of the characters, right? So many characters in this game play so differently. And I think the reason why they're actually able to find ways to make characters play so differently is because of how much depth you can just have with how simple of combat there is in this game. One thing I'm still like not fully convinced about is the idea that in order to have fun at this game, you need to like, you know, pick a character that plays the game, so to speak, as in like, you know, plays the Binding of Isaac, whatever that means, right? But I do think that this game being kind of sandboxy in the way I've been describing this whole time means that you can actually play it in whatever way you want. And I think that's all the more reason to appreciate even more some of these like more experimental characters, some of these more deviant characters that exist in the game, such as with Tainted Magdalene. But there's just different strokes for different folks, right? So it's not something that I want to harp on too much. Certain people will appreciate the game that they gradually grow accustomed to through the base characters, while others will appreciate the more experimental nature of characters that were added in Repentance. And unfortunately, a lot of those characters are secrets, but it's kind of clever to do that as well, because it makes sure not to overwhelm any new player at how like massive the character select screen is or something. But still, I will say like it could have been better communicated that there's actually like a whole set of additional characters in this game, because the reality is that there are actually 34 characters in the game instead of the base that you end up unlocking. You end up thinking that there's what, like 10 characters, but then there's like an additional set of characters for every character once you unlock the Ascent, and it gets pretty crazy, because there are also the secret characters in Keeper, in Lost, and is that it? Keeper, Lost, I guess those are the secret characters. Oh, and Forgotten, that's right. Because those conditions, and I think that's where it just gets obnoxious, by the way, but the conditions to unlock those characters are just a little too much. Like, I get it, they want to be secret, they wanted to make those characters secret characters, they want to make sure that no one can get those characters on accident, but they're in the game. Like, I want to be able to play all the characters in the game without being completely clueless on how to unlock them. And I know games from long ago used to do this all the time, but usually those kinds of characters could still be unlocked through like normal gameplay and not have to go through so many hoops and hurdles in order to like find a way to unlock that character. Whereas in this game, you have to go to the first boss in under a minute, and then you have to beat that boss. You have to bomb or place an explosion in the first room of the floor, and then you have to take the shovel that drops, and then you gotta dodge Mom's Foot and take it all the way to Boss Rush, fight Boss Rush, complete the shovel, take it all the way to Dark Room, open up the dirt that's in one of the rooms in Dark Room, and boom, you've unlocked a character. Why is there so much just to unlock a new character in the game? Why? Right? There's also two other secret characters, Keeper and Lost. I guess they changed the way you unlock Lost in this game, where instead of whatever it used to be, you just have to die with Missing Poster in a sacrifice room. But even that is something that's like weird. Like, why would why would anyone do that, right? Why would anyone do that on accident? I guess someone would do it on accident once and be like, oh, what is this? Right? But as far as we are concerned, there could be another secret character that no one's ever unlocked before because we just don't know. I mean, I don't think there is, obviously, but I'm just kind of being facetious right now. But still, point being, like, I think secrets do not need to be this. Like, I think secrets can be kept for certain things in a game like this, but not for other things. Like, not for content that gets deeper in the game. But sure, you can do it for like certain techniques or certain items or how to play the game in general. You can do it for those because you can allow players to explore. But I don't think there's anything profound about exploring how to unlock the Forgotten. Because at the end of the day, once one person figures it out, they're going to tell their friends. And they're going to tell their friends, and everyone's going to know. And it'll be known forever, right? But in terms of the ways of playing the game, the techniques, the mechanics, those are not necessarily like constant. Those are not like something that you just do and follow it to the T and it's done. Those are something that can be applied differently per player, because those are strategies that each player forms and kind of decides whether it works or not. So those, I think, are fine to let the player be a part of their own personal discovery, but not the same for unlocking certain paths or certain characters. I don't necessarily think that's the way to go. Okay, so we can talk more about mechanics now. So again, we already mentioned this game being very simple in its control set, but there's a bit more depth beyond the simple controls. Now obviously you can use analog controls or just digital buttons to fire tiers and move around, but I do think analog controls offer the most range of movement in terms of the precision that you're able to achieve with all the directions thanks to analog inputs. It's not even the precision, it's a lot of the time just the fact that you can kind of determine what speed you move at. So you can like micro walk and stuff, right? But a lot of beyond the surface controls I think are really cool with the way this game handles momentum and its kind of physics system. You know, theoretically it's like, oh, I can only shoot in a cardinal direction, but if you're a little bit more precise and deliberate with your movement, you can actually shoot diagonally by moving in a certain pattern to allow for your character to cover a lot better angles. And you can also leverage the different types of stats that you might be changing throughout your run in order to create these situations more easily. And that works really well in tandem with the items. So those would be like more shooting oriented mechanics, right? But what about mechanics from items that you have? So in this game, there's several different kinds of consumables, not just like regular items that you pick up, like the one I have in my inventory right now, but also consumables, which range from these tarot cards, which range from pills, and then there's also runes, there's special cards. They all do a variety of things. And I really do think they did a great job in setting the baseline with these consumable effects, because it offers like some sort of consistency to a lot of runs. Roguelites typically are defined by having like a great degree of randomness, but it's nice to have like some consistency here and there that still allows for like comfort and growth for a player, especially as they're trying to like beat the game more often and more often. So we can see like something like the Emperor, like it's like, oh, what does the Emperor do? And then you use it for the first time, right? And you're like, oh, what is this, right? But it's just a boss fight. And the more you use it, the more you work with consumables that are consistent in this way, it's a lot easier to kind of deduce what effect they produce. And in this case, it's just a simple teleport to the boss. And here you can see one of the cool interactions I have with my items in this boss. Whenever I shoot a bomb at this boss or drop a bomb, the boss just kind of, it ends up just in the boss's mouth pretty much. it's really interesting. Ignore the fact that I lost Dio, but anyway. The variety of different consumables, I think, is really mesmerizing. I think that's another thing that keeps the player interested over time. Because, like, if they come back to it after a while, they will know what the consumables do, because the consumables are consistent in every run. And the more you use something that's consistent, the easier it is to remember what it does for your run, especially if it paints a vivid picture or provides a vivid effect. As for like items themselves, because there are so many of them, too many, dare I say, it can be hard to remember what they do. And that's something that's not necessarily a problem in the game, but I will say that the number of items is very overwhelming for a lot of people that are trying to learn what things do, especially given that the game doesn't tell you what they do. And I think a simple fix for this would be just to have an inventory list in the pause menu showing what all of your items do that you've acquired. And that would go a long way to like helping players still be able to experiment, because they can just take an item and be able to know what it does, but they won't be able to know what items do that they haven't taken. Because you see on the pause menu, like we see my inventory already. It's really something like that's a natural extension to this, just to have like a little tooltip or description for each item that's in my inventory. We can also see my stats here that are marked as tallies on the pause menu. The whole stats on the left thing is something that was added in Repentance. It took them long enough to be able to add something that's just a basic stat display. And it's quite a shame in my opinion, because I do think this game can benefit more from showing a lot more of the primitive info. The things that will just improve the quality of life for the game. That's the main thing I want to mention about mechanics. There's a bunch of other things that I've grown an appreciation for that I didn't really recognize at first. And it's related to rerolling pretty much, and taking items from certain pools, managing money, using your health as a resource. And all of these things are like more advanced, but they allow for you to like, they take you really far as you keep playing, basically. And it's really rewarding. And I think eventually what ends up happening for this game as you keep playing is there becomes more of an emphasis on strategical planning as opposed to outright mechanics, because of how simple the mechanics are, right? Like, you already hit the baseline pretty much once you figure out how to move and shoot. And once you figure out that it's good to just dodge from enemies, right? But as you get later on, you can't really rely on just being able to dodge around enemies. You gotta have a real well thought out plan for what items you take and how you manage your economy through each of the floors, because the enemies don't get easier when you keep playing. And speaking of which, the enemy design, I think that's a low point. I already mentioned the high point in the previous three, which were the mechanics being a high point, the items being a high point, and the meta progression being a mostly high point. But I think the enemy design is where this game kind of falls a little bit down, as well as with the boss design. I'm not a big fan of enemies that just continuously spawn enemies of their type over and over. I don't know. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of it. And unfortunately, this game kind of leans towards that direction. And it's not something that most people probably would complain about, because the enemy designs are basic for what it's worth. It's not like they're really complicated or hard to deal with for the most part. But, well, I shouldn't even say that, because enemies that spawn other enemies are hard to deal with if you're not able to clear them fast enough. But I think more than the difficulty, it's the tedium. It just becomes extremely laborious to have to keep clearing enemies over and over when they keep spawning continuous waves of themselves. And plenty of the enemies that don't spawn copies of themselves or copies of other enemies either, as you can see with this room, they just run at you, right? Just run at you and they deal damage if they run too close to you or something. Or, you know, if they don't like directly spawn enemies, they shoot some array of tears or explode upon being defeated. And it all just keeps building up into like the massive array of knowledge checks that this game has as well. And it's not like something that's engaging or fun over a long period of time, I would say. At least I would personally say that's not the engaging or fun part of the game. The engaging and fun part of the game that's kept me playing this long has been with the item combinations and has been with like getting more comfortable and learning more about how to plan out the strategy for continuing and descending through the floors. But I think the enemy engagements in combat are like a side, like they're like very secondary, if I may say that. It's similar to like how certain Metroidvanias have relatively poor combat, and the combat becomes like an afterthought compared to like the main exploration gameplay. I think for a game like this, the main appeal is in being able to build your character and seeing your strategy like come to life by how far you can make it, rather than the actual like enemy engagements themselves. And I know I was just saying earlier, I like the mechanics, right? I like how simple and deep it can get, but that is still separate and distinct from the actual enemy design itself. We've seen a lot of enemies here on this floor that spawn certain enemies, or that just basically just bounce around the screen and then don't do much else. They don't actually like fire any bullet patterns. And I'm actually very surprised that this is kind of the direction that this game's enemies lean towards, because a lot of games like this that rely on shooting mechanics end up like developing some form of like shmup or bullet hell style of enemy patterns. And we see a little bit of that for late game bosses for The Binding of Isaac, but this game reserves it for very special circumstances rather than making it like the routine combat that is employed for a lot of the game. And I'm not sure. I'm a little disappointed with it personally. I don't know if I'm a big fan of how they've relegated the best potential part of the enemy design to very special occasions in the game, where it actually could have been more part of the routine combat to make the mechanics like shine in a new way. But I can understand if they didn't want to highlight the enemy design component and they just wanted to focus more on providing quality in the item interactions, then that's understandable, I guess. But that is something I have as a knock against the game. Excuse me. As a knock against the game. We see this just time and time again with a lot of enemies across the entirety of the game, where it's just spawn enemies or run at player or bounce around the screen, and it's just very elementary enemy design that frankly is gonna put a lot of people to sleep over a long period of time. There are a couple of enemies in the game specifically. I can actually pull up the wiki for this because this is something I did want to point out and didn't point out in the boss tier list that we did yesterday. But there are a couple of enemies in the game that uniquely annoy me. Some of them for reasons I've listed already, and others just entirely separate. But I did want to point them out before I move to the next point, which is the boss design. So here we go. Enter the Needle. This little enemy right here. This little guy with the frowny face. This thing was added in Repentance, apparently. And basically what they do is they just like jump out of the ground without warning and then go back into the ground after trying to hit you. Where they jump out of the ground, it's not certain where they do. And the only telegraph for when these enemies are about to attack you is if you enter a room, the doors are closed, and you don't see any enemies. That is the only telegraph. If you see enemies in a room and the doors are closed, you don't actually know if this enemy exists and is going to hit you out of the ground. And the best way to play around it is to not move, which does not feel good. Because moving in this game gives you leverage in a lot of rooms. It allows you to have a bit more preemption in your ability to defend and dodge, because shots are coming at you from all over the place, and spiders can crawl at you while you're stationary, which is not a good idea, which is why it's not a good idea to stay stationary. But with the needles, which thankfully, typically spiders and needles are on the same room, thankfully. I just use that as an example to say that moving and staying active on your ability to dodge is something that this game reinforces as a good thing to do. But then we have an enemy like this where there's not really any good way to know that this enemy is in the room unless you either recognize the pattern of the specific room you're in and know that the enemy is in the room, or you don't see any enemies in the room and the doors are closed and you know that it has to be needles. But to me, it never feels good to get hit by this enemy because it's just, in the moment, you don't have a lot of time to process that this enemy exists in the room or can exist if there are other enemies in that room, and the enemy just pops out of the ground without there being any indication that it's actually an enemy in the room. And you see, this is not an enemy that spawns enemies. It's not even an enemy that bounces around the screen. It's not an enemy that has a death rattle. Yet, I think I found it to become my least favorite enemy in this game still. And it's one of the other archetypes of enemies in this game, which is enemies that are uninteractable for an elongated period of time. We all love uninteractable enemies, don't we? There's a couple of these that are like this. Obviously, all the grimaces are like that, but that's not a big deal. Those I could just consider like hazards. But there are a couple of enemies in this game that have like some period of time where they're uninteractable. Anytime there's a bishop in a room, the bishop makes other enemies uninteractable until you kill the bishop, which is that's not the worst, to be honest, but it does mean that you're restricted in how you can do rooms. There's another enemy that's like this. I'm trying to look for it. It's pretty famous too, but once I scroll to it, I'll reveal it. Yeah, I guess oh, there it is. The Host. The Hosts are famous in Isaac for being uninteractable until they pop their head open. And the best way to pop their head open quickly is to briefly walk away from them and walk back towards them. Because for some reason their AI is like kind of programmed to go ahead and try to attack you when you're running away. And these enemies are not interactable until you play their little mini game. Thankfully, I've not really come to like have distaste for this enemy much longer because, you know, at least there you can see that they're there, and it's still pretty fine to deal with them. It's just the fact that it does slow down your gameplay. And of course, they waste time in terms of, you know, you have to wait for them to pop open their head. And if you're not able to kill them during that time, you have to wait for them again. So the waiting idea, where you don't have any agency or interactivity, is not the most fun. And I think in general, that's not the enemy design I'm a big fan of. But hosts are not really the worst culprit of that, even in the whole game. And I've not really come to have a dislike for them as much as I used to. But there is a boss in this game that is kind of like that, or bosses. There are multiple bosses in this game that are like that. And those bosses would be Forsaken and Rag Mega. Basically, what these bosses do is they spawn some enemies that are other types, like usually like bonies or spiders, and then they go in this uninteractable state. They basically just turn invincible. But not only are they invincible during that time, they're still a hitbox. So if you run into their contact box, then of course you take damage. I'm not saying that's something that's hard to deal with, but I'm saying like that's still like a time waster. And still very annoying in terms of like when you're in the middle of combat. You just have to wait them out and play their little mini game before you can hit them again. And it's same with Rag Mega, who also has these like little spheres that are following after you. I'm not a big fan of that. But in general, the design of enemies and bosses in this game is very, very simple. So it's not surprising that they depended on something like this that quote unquote make the bosses like a bit more difficult to fight. So that's all I have to say about the enemy design. There's not really much else. I mean, again, it can be summed up very quickly, the enemy design in this game. Enemies that spawn enemies, enemies that bounce around the sides of the screen, enemies that chase after you, and enemies that are uninteractable for a brief period of time before they become interactable. And then, of course, also enemies that have some sort of attack on death, like a death rattle or an explosion, or they break into two, something like that. It's all very simple. And you could argue that, okay, the simplicity of this game is where it shines because they were able to make a lot happen with nothing. And yeah, I can give them that. They were able to make a very deep game out of very simple design concepts. But I don't think that's because of the enemy design that was able to be achieved. I think that was because of everything else around the game related to the items, related to the consumables, related to the interactions that they have with each other, and all of those things rather than the enemy designs themselves. Because with how simple the enemies are in this game, you can basically just put like stick figures in this game and it would be somewhat of the same. Somewhat. If the stick figures just had a contact damage box, then that would be the same level of depth as the enemies that are in the game already. That is of course an exaggeration, but the point still stands. Okay, let's talk about we already talked about quality of life features. This game lacks a lot of them in the base game. A lot of mods try to fix that in like terms of like telling you what items do or helping you remember what your hidden special room chances, or helping you remember like what number of sacrifice you're on and what the payout is for them. Helping you remember yeah, I think, oh yeah, helping you remember what trinkets do as well. Yeah, but those things are not available in the base game, and obviously there's a reason why the devs want you to figure out things on your own. We've already established that before, so I'm not going to reiterate that point. But I do think this game could use some quality of life to help the experience of learning and figuring things out on your own be improved. Because this game is a lot for a lot of people. A lot of people won't stick it out for that long, especially given how many achievements there are. And I'm sure the devs are fine with that, but at the same time, I don't think the plan and steps to be able to bring more people to playing it longer would be that out of reach. There are just some short steps away to making this game have much better overall quality of life and playing experience to allow people to be able to stick with it a lot longer. One thing that I was particularly impressed by during my time playing it and during my time watching it as well was the idea of being able to choose your path, and the different paths lead to like different endings. So for example, if you pick up the Polaroid and you go to Boom 2 and you take the path up the beam of light, you get taken to the cathedral, which is like a church themed area, and you fight Isaac, which is yourself, which is pretty interesting. And after you fight Isaac, through the chest that appears, you would think like, oh, treasure chest, let's hop in. And you go inside, and all of a sudden you're transported to a floor called the chest. And it's like a whole set of enemies and bosses that you've seen before through your run. Not like literally the bosses and enemies that you exactly encountered, but it's the idea is the same still. And at the end of the chest, you fight another boss, and then that's the end of the run. But there's another path you can take where you take the negative, and you go to Womb 2, you go down the trapdoor instead of going up the beam of light, and you get taken to a different dark place called Shale. And Shale, where you fight Satan, after you beat him, there's another chest that spawns. You go inside, and it takes you to Dark Room. And Dark Room is a similar path to chest, but with a lot more gruesome and difficult enemies to deal with, in theory at least. And the end boss, being the lamb, tries to set it apart from the end boss of the chest, where chest is not only a lot more like lighthearted themed, I guess, but also has a lot more like items that you can take without spending your health. Whereas in Dark Room, when you first enter it, the items that are available to take cost your health at the start. So like goes to show that like they try to theme the different paths differently. But I do think where the game is the most fun and kind of feels the most immersive in the ability to take different paths is with the alternate path to go to Mother and the alternate path to go to the Ascent to the Beast. Those are like, at least once you know of how to do them, because we already talked about the point about them not being super obvious to do. But once you know how to do them, it becomes a really fun way to perform your run and also figure out whether you're strong enough to even get to those bosses, because those bosses are a lot tougher to fight and they require a lot more difficult enemies to get through in order to get to them. So I really thought like the different paths that this game has is really cool. It reminded me of this book that one of my friends used to read all the time in elementary school. It's like marketed as like a second person book. I forgot what it was called, but basically like as you read the book, it's all written in like second person. So it's like you, right? And you like decide on what thing you want to do. And based on that thing, you turn the page of the book to like a certain page and it will like continue the story from there. I guess it's supposed to be similar to like what you would do in like a visual novel, but it's in a physical book form. If anyone is familiar with what I'm talking about, then feel free to say. But that's how this game feels like, and it's really cool. I think any game that offers like different paths you can take is another good form of immersion. All right, last positive thing I have for gameplay related things is the music of the game. I mean, we've been hanging out in Dross forever, right? But the music of this game, especially in Repentance, is awesome. This is one of the first things that really captivated me and kept me playing, honestly. And it's not just like, oh, the background music is really cool and good. It's that the music changes and adapts to the environment you're in. The way it works is that if you're in a room with a lot of enemies, the music noticeably gets more intense, and they add like an extra track of melody to the music that's playing. This would have been noticeable in this room. And players and the devs call it the layer, I believe. Layer. Additionally, there's different tracks that play based on the room you enter, such as the secret room playing this like weird little jingle that's a little mysterious. And when you enter like a boss room, special theme plays. When you defeat the boss, another extension of that theme plays. When you go to new floors or new chapters, there's a different like melody that plays as well for that. There's just so many things about the music in this game that were so well handled, and I think that is one of my favorite parts about playing this game. Legitimately. I know people will think I'm weird for that, but I think the music is actually just one of my favorite parts about playing this game. Because I mean, not only do I like the music, of course, but I think the music is just really well fit into the immersion. And you can see how in this boss fight, the music that's playing right now is the alternate path boss music. But ooh, I'm gonna get hit. Yeah, the alternate path music is playing right now, but the music that typically plays during a boss fight is not the alternate path music. It's the music that plays based on the chapter you're in. But for all alternate path bosses, the same theme plays. So it's supposed to tell you like, hey, you're in an intense part of the game that only players that made it this far would get to, right? If you choose to. It's not, you don't even have to go this far. It's if you choose to go to this part of the game. And then we defeat the boss. There's like a little victory melody that plays at the end. The music dies down. And then you re-enter the room and you see how the theme is still different. Like this theme is like kind of a, how to describe it? It's like an intermediary before you enter the next floor. And I think still having this, even after you defeat the boss, makes it feel like, are you sure you want to go to the next floor? Do you want to really know the mysteries that lie beneath? Right? And again, all part of the immersion. I think it's just handled excellently, and I rarely see any games take in-game music to this level of craft. I know that the music wasn't always handled by Ridiculon the whole time, but Ridiculon has been doing the music for quite a while now, it seems like, and it feels like they just nail like a perfect environment and theming for how the game is. Like, you really don't know what you're going into for each room and each floor. And I think the music helps support that mystery and, you know, frankly, scariness of each new room that you enter. One thing that I do think the music can be improved upon for is the music for Depths and Womb. I think the music in Depths and Womb doesn't quite have the same like level of engagement and immersion and mystery that the music in earlier floors does. And the music in Alt Path feels so far above the rest of the music in the game. It feels extremely odd. But I will say there are some other themes that really do well to convey like this is an intense boss fight. As an example, the music for the Beast fight and the music for the Hush fight, I think they're handled pretty well. They're especially great to listen to, and I think they convey that intensity properly. The music from Depths and Womb is probably the low point of the music in the game. I should mention as well, the voice acting that's added for consumables, it's very memorable, and it's very easy to like kind of be engaged with that. You just heard the announcer say the world, right? For pills as well, when you check them, it's like relax or horf or what's another one? Explosive diarrhea. All those like voice lines for different pills is really cool too. There's some sort of like little feedback that is put into your brain when you take a pill that's bad, and the announcer like says like, you know, what that pill was. It's pretty interesting. It's probably mostly psychological, but I think it's memorable and a positive point for the game as well. I mean, otherwise, this game doesn't really have voice acting apart from that. There is the voice acting for the final ending cutscenes, specifically for latter stage endings of the game. And then there's also voice acting for like, I guess one boss I can think of right now, which is Siren. Does that count really? I don't know. But yeah, apart from that, there's also all these like sound effects that continue, which if we enter this room, we can hear the sound effects that different enemies make, and they usually try to carry them over. And I think having consistency between the sound effects is pretty cool, because even though like it's like, oh, I've heard the sound effect already, that's a little boring, right? I think it still allows for you to match the action with what effect would happen. So if an enemy makes that sound right there, you can guess that they died, right? And then you can check over there, oh, they actually did die. I think that's another underrated component of the game too, because of how consistent the sound effects are. It's easy to map like an action that took place in the game with the sound that triggered from it. And you guys can hear like the little additional melodic layer that is playing right now for this room. But as soon as I clear the room, that layer is going to be gone. And it's back to a normal music track. I do think that a lot of games don't handle music in this way though, because it's not always something that is considered from the start. Like the music is added kind of later on into the development of the game. But in the case of Isaac, it feels like, especially with Rebirth and of course Repentance as well, it feels like the music was a part of the game's development, essentially. Like it was one of the first things that they probably considered. And of course, if I'm wrong on that, then that's completely fine too. But it's important to think about like why I feel like the music fits so well with the experience of playing the game. And it's much easier to do something like this when you take it into account, or you start composing the music alongside the development of the game. So I think that's enough with discussing the gameplay stuff that I like and dislike. I've already kind of emphasized which ones I like and dislike. I like pretty much everything about the game except for the nature of how certain secrets are kept in the game, along with the enemy and boss design. And then of course the length of the meta progression. But I like the mechanics, I like the gameplay, I like the way items interact, I like the music, I like I like the variety of paths. I like the sound effect and sound design. I think it's all really good. A couple more points on gameplay though. I should mention this, that whenever you venture through different parts of a floor, there are sometimes, like as I mentioned with this being a roguelike, there are sometimes different room layouts that you'll encounter, right? And it makes the number of rooms per floor like all over the place, right? Which is not even a bad thing. However, there are some cases where you play the game more and more and you start to realize that, yeah, I need to explore this floor more deeply in order to get stronger and have a higher chance of winning the run. The issue though is that when you have to continuously walk through rooms over and over, especially with some rooms having some hazards and things like that, it becomes a bit of a chore. And that's something I'm not sure how I feel would be fixed. Like, how would they even address that with the way the game is designed currently? It's probably something that a lot of viewers of mine notice as well, and probably don't comment on it because it's something they get used to, or it's something that they're not sure if is a bad thing or a good thing. But it's something that I guess I've gotten used to at this point, but I've still not really liked from the get-go. Especially when certain curses are applied. And yes, this game being a roguelite does have curses. There are a total of... We can pull up the wiki page for this, actually. Wow. The wiki. So there are a total of 7 different curses. Or 6 different curses. Curse of the Blind, Curse of Darkness, Curse of the Lost, Curse of the Maze, Curse of the Unknown, Curse of the Labyrinth, and that is it. The other 2 are not technically things that you can encounter normally. Curse of the Blind is probably the most run impactful curse that there is. And honestly, this is one of my favorite curses, because this is the curse that actually like feels like it's impactful on the run and changes the way you play in a meaningful way. So I appreciate having this curse in the game. Even though, of course, when you see it in your run, you're like, ah, Curse of the Blind. Because you're not sure what item you're going to get now at that point. But figuring out how to play around that feels like a rewarding and thoughtful challenge. I don't know if the same can be said about other curses, though. Especially not Curse of the Lost. I think Curse of the Lost has long been my least favorite curse, and I've grown more and more weary and tired of this curse as time has gone on. Curse of the Lost is the time-wasting curse. It basically removes the ability to see your map and increases the possible number of rooms in a floor by 4. I already mentioned having large rooms, or having a large number of rooms and a large layout on a floor makes it even more painful to walk through rooms when you're trying to backtrack and when you're trying to optimize floors more. And Curse of the Lost just makes it even more of a pain. And I think genuinely this does remove remove from the quality of playing the game for me personally. It removes from the enjoyment. And it doesn't really feel like that interesting either, because, you know, Curse of the Lost can make it theoretically harder to find secret rooms, right? But it just feels, it doesn't really feel like it's a game-changing curse in a meaningful way. It just feels like it's a game-annoying curse, basically. The other curses, like Curse of Darkness, Curse of the Maze, and Curse of the Labyrinth, those curses don't really have much negative impact on a run, although Curse of the Darkness on certain floors can be a bit of a pain to see things, such as with Mausoleum floor, with Gehenna floor, and with Dank Depths floor. But most of the time, Curse of Darkness has little to no impact. It doesn't feel threatening enough, given it's the curse. It feels maybe more annoying than threatening, but not to the degree of annoying as Curse of the Lost. And the Curse of the Maze maybe is annoying at worst, but only slightly annoying. In fact, Curse of the Maze is considered beneficial because of the way it allows you to find secret rooms more easily. But if you're talking about in terms of going for certain speed marks or being teleported into the boss out of nowhere, it just becomes more of an annoyance as well. Curse of the Unknown doesn't allow you to see your health, which I think can be interesting because it determines whether you can take risk on playing certain machines out. But at the same time, I don't think Curse of the Unknown has that level of impact as some of the other high impact curses like Curse of the Blind or Lost. And then Curse of the Labyrinth ends up being beneficial depending on the situation and depending on the floor. In the first floor, they allow for it to be beneficial because you get more rooms to clear, and it allows you to have a higher deal chance on the subsequent floor. But on floors like Depths XL, it just makes it such that you miss out on flexibility to be able to go to a certain goal at that point in the run, or a certain path, I should say. So yeah, while the curses can be interesting in theory, I think in practice they end up just being mostly an annoyance and don't offer that much as far as enhancing the gameplay experience. And I'm a bit disappointed with it because I think there was kind of a lot of opportunity there, and they ended up keeping these curses similar as they were a long time ago over time. That's the understanding I get, and that's why it kind of feels like the curses are the way they are right now. But it still highlights the fact that, you know, the whole walking back and forth between rooms is not a highlight of the gameplay experience necessarily for me. The act of doing it itself. I'm not necessarily talking about the reason for doing it. I'm talking about the act of doing it. I think the variety of types of rooms, though, is really nice. Like having the ability to find a vault or an arcade or a sacrifice room or a dice room. All of these things add even more variety to runs. And we already talked about planetarium doing that too, but I think all of these combined is just awesome. And of course, we got a little bit of gambling for the people that like gambling as well. Something for everyone. Okay, let's get to aesthetic components of the game, and then I'm going to call it into stream right there. The aesthetic of the game, very gross. Let's not sugarcoat it. This game is disgusting, and that's on purpose. Apparently that's Edmund McMillan style. It's got a lot of toilet humor and references to like drugs and, you know, things like, you know, there's pills and there's syringes. There's all of these things, right? These things can all be considered gross and unappealing to have in most kinds of games, at least. But something I had heard from watching a video of Ed McMillan describing his gameplay design for this game is he kind of made this game to like not succeed. He made this game to fail, apparently, which is kind of why we see this, a lot of this here. He wanted to basically not hold back. He wanted to give his unfiltered, you know, full representation of himself kind of gameplay experience. But I do think the way the game is presented, it's kind of weird to say this, but I feel like because at first it definitely put me off a lot. Like, I'm not a big fan of it at all. But I think over time I started to not really notice it. I'm gonna be real. Like, the gameplay is like immersive or hypnotic enough where you just don't really notice the aesthetic of the game as much anymore. But I do think the art style itself is really good. Like, you know, this is of course like, you know, the old school arcade pixel art, but it's had a nice little modern texture and look ever since some of the newer versions of this game, of Isaac. But we can also see that there's some visual options to make the game pop out differently, such as a filter. And we can see this filter is this kind of looks weird, doesn't it? I don't normally play with filter on, of course, but doesn't this look quite different? The filter actually kind of makes it look more cartoony in a way. But having this visual style, I think works kind of well with the weird, disgusting aesthetic of the game. Oddly enough, I think that's what allows for it to be kind of ignorable. If it were a bit more realistic, I think that's where it would be something that would put off even more people and probably not have them play it, including probably me. Something that caught my eye too, the more I played it, is that each time you get a new item, there's like a new visual appearance applied to your character. And I think, like, this is not something I really care about that much, but in terms of like just making it a fun game to look at and play, I think it just goes to show how much effort was put into the game. And it's not something that many people will care about. Again, it's just cosmetic, right, at the end of the day. But I still think all the effort that they put into the style of this game visually, the cosmetic appearance changes contribute to that just as much as anything else that's gameplay related. And here yet again we are fighting a boss that spawns enemies. So I don't really have much else to comment on the visual style, I'm gonna be honest. I can't say I hate it, but I can't say I'm a big fan of the exact, you know, potty aesthetic, I guess. I'm being gentle about it, but it's not something I would have wanted. But that being said, I do think they did a good job of not making it super off-putting. So next from there is some of the other things, such as like the user experience that is apart from the game itself. So I already mentioned when you first launch the game, the cutscene that plays, this little main menu where it's like press start. It's kind of old school. It's really cool. And then you enter the menus. The menus are all really nice and snappy. It doesn't feel like, you know, they're wasting your time with like, you know, a fade in animation, fade out animation, you can literally just mash through and you're right back in, right? If you wanted to, at least. The menus being very snappy is something I appreciate, because that means, you know, I waste less time going through menus. There's not as much time loading as well. And oopsie, I accidentally closed the game. But yeah, you see how I closed the game, I launched it, and we're right back in. Or do you guys see? Well, you didn't see you didn't see the part where I was pressing the buttons to launch back in, but I launched back in just like that. So yeah, I like that aspect of it. And then the fact that the menus are very clearly outlined, like what they lead you to. Challenges lead you to challenges. Press tab for custom challenges. Custom challenges are there. There's mods, stats, and you can view all the stats from here. And options. There's not like loads of menus that just confuse you over time, right? I will say, while this style of menu is pretty minimalist, I do feel like there's still some things missing from what the game is supposed to tell you. And that's, of course, by design. This game is still trying to hide from you what it's all about, and the menus are definitely good at doing that. Yeah, everything about like the menus and stuff, it feels indie, it feels, how do I say it? It feels like hipster, I guess. It's trying to be different, but you know, it's an indie game. Indie games are different than most games in that regard. And even when you see like some of the things that are related to the story and endings, you can tell that it's a lot different than the way other games present their respective story and endings. It's all pretty mysterious most of the time. So, speaking of which, this will be the last point I mentioned for the stream. The story. The story is supposed to be like related to familial issues and how like Isaac's trying to escape from them. So he goes down to the basement and fights monsters, right? And it's supposed to be like all his imagination and stuff, but what ends up happening is that he suffocates in the chest, and that's that. Yeah, I mean, the way the story is presented is, again, it's not trying to present it super in your face. It kind of tells the story environmentally and gives you bit by bit, piece by piece, as you keep progressing through the game. And it hints at things within the game as well, through the items, through the bosses, and things like that, right? But at the end of it all, you fight Mother, you fight Beast, and you learn that, you know, all these endings are actually kind of conveying the same story at the end, where Isaac meets a bitter end. And, you know, of course, the family weeps about it. I think the commentary the game is doing under the surface is something that not a lot of people quite catch. I'm not necessarily going to go into the specifics of my thoughts on the commentary the game is offering, but I will say that, like, over time, I grew in appreciation of what kind of message the game was going for, or like at least what story the game was trying to tell. Did not like completely go over my head eventually. Like eventually I was like, okay, I can understand, and I can understand and relate, kind of thing. Yeah, this kind of storytelling where, you know, it's not a story presenting game. It's not a game that focuses heavily on the story, but they still give you like hints and bits about the story over time. I think that's a cool way to do it, especially if you're pretty confident that your gameplay is going to be engrossing enough where players don't necessarily have to focus on the story if they don't want to, and they can still enjoy playing the game. Because there are a lot of games where if you don't enjoy the story, then you won't enjoy the game, right? But this game allows you to still enjoy the game without necessarily having to pay too much attention to the story, which is something that allows for more people to be able to enjoy it. Yeah, I think that's a sufficient reflection on my thoughts about the game itself. Now, about my journey of playing the game, about my achievement hunt, how I felt about it overall, I never really gave a full culmination of my thoughts on it. But overall, a lot of you are probably surprised that I even bothered playing this game for this long, trying to get all the achievements. Like, why would I even bother doing that? I liked the game enough to do it. I'll say that. I stuck around because I liked the game enough. But one thing too is that this game was a good balance of chill and like engaging gameplay, where I can, like, you know, sit down, boot it up and play no matter what kind of mood I was in. If I was in the mood for, like, you know, a more difficult experience of a game, I could boot up this game in the evening. If I just wanted a very chill time for the evening, I could still boot up this game. And the range of like basically the flexibility and like what kind of experience you want to seek out for a game you play during an evening was very clearly offered by this game for me. So it made it the obvious stream game to do over a long period of time. And why not have like the achievement hunt as a nice cool thing to incentivize me to play it over a long period of time on stream, right? Hey Juan, what's up? We're almost done here. I know you came to the stream, but we're just almost done, unfortunately. So if you want to catch anything else that I mentioned in today's stream, you'll have to probably check the VOD. But yeah, in terms of the journey of the achievement hunt, when I was first playing the game, I was definitely like, man, this is a wiki game and I don't like it, right? I don't like that it's a wiki game. I don't like that you have to look up everything. But over time during the achievement hunt, it felt cool because it felt like I was going through like a cool adventure that I didn't know when would it end, because I didn't know how long I would be able to stick it out. And you know, eventually we made it to the end, and it felt like I grew from the time I first played this game to now. But I think that's what I liked a lot about the achievement hunt I did for this game. I don't necessarily particularly care about the number 637 as much as I might have looked like I cared. Like, I mostly just want to make it interesting for the stream, right? And that's something that I hope like none of you guys are too like mad at. But you know, I have trouble sticking with the game after I start playing it, so I needed to really like try hard to anchor myself and finish out this game, and that's what the achievement hunt allowed me to do, is try to make sure I finish it after having started it. And it took a great deal of time. It took just under 6 months. I started playing this game in mid to late April, and we finished getting the 637 achievements at the beginning of October this month. So it took a long time, and it takes a lot of people way longer than it took me. The time it took for me was over the course of 597 hours, almost 600 hours. A lot of people take a long time to get all achievements in this game, and I'm not saying that I got them in a short amount of time. I'm more so saying that the reason why it might have not taken me as much time in terms of the number of playtime hours is because of all the watching and all the wiki reading I was trying to do in order to make sure I finished this game. Because, you know, if this game had taken me any longer, I might have just gone insane, probably. That's the thing, right? So, but again, like, I have no regrets necessarily. I mean, I still enjoyed my time playing this game, especially on stream, because it gave me something to be able to play on a consistent basis and have like a start goal and an end goal for. So it was really nice. Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts on this game. I had planned on doing a much longer reflection on this game and my time playing it overall, but I do think that this stream contains a good overall summary of my thought on the game. And overall, would I give this game a thumbs up? I would, absolutely. I highly recommend anyone play this game, whether or not you're a roguelite fan. If you're a fan of indie video games especially, I highly recommend this game. I don't necessarily recommend playing to get all 637 achievements. I don't think that's necessary to be able to see what this game does well and get enjoyment out of it. But I do highly recommend playing specifically the Repentance DLC expansion. I think that is the best way to play the game. By far. It's such a high quality experience for specifically Isaac. So yeah, I would recommend this game. I enjoyed playing it. I will definitely be playing more roguelites from here on, because I'm interested in seeing what sort of things carry over and what sort of things this game does uniquely from other games. But that necessarily won't all happen on stream, because as I mentioned earlier, in streams this week, the next game I'll be playing as my next on-stream playthrough will be an Ace Attorney game. And I've decided it'll probably be the first Ace Attorney game since I managed to get my hands on it now. So that'll start probably after Japan, which would be at the end of, or at the beginning of November. Because October is going to be jam-packed for me. So we're going to get to that at the start of November. And alongside that, we'll also be doing some learning and practice and runs of the Aria of Sorrow any percent no 0 HP speedrun. It's nice to have a bit of a competitive thing alongside a bit of a more casual thing, for me at least. So we'll be doing those two in tandem. Look forward to it, guys. But for now, this will be all for Isaac on stream for a certain amount of time. I probably will play Isaac a couple of times on stream from time to time, but it will be a while before I come back to it on stream in a dedicated manner. After all, you guys are probably all exhausted from all the Isaac that's been done over the past 5 months and 3 weeks or so. 5 months and 2 weeks. But yeah, guys, that's gonna be my sign off for tonight's stream. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed listening to my soapbox, sharing my thoughts on this game. I tried to be as coherent as I could, but I didn't have enough time to write an outline, so it was kind of improvised. But regardless, these are my thoughts in the game, and this will be all for Isaac from now. For now, not from now. Have a good rest of your evenings, and I might see you guys later this week for a blind race that's coming up this later on during this week, probably. We'll see. Who knows? But in any case, there'll probably be some streams this week, so see you guys then. Look forward to it, and have a good rest of your nights.